Hi, I'm Tiger Blood. I'm not. I'm not Tiger Blood. That would be cool. But I'm Shane. I'm making these videos because I'm working through some issues. Uh, and one of the problems that I'm having among many right now, and they're not problems, they're opportunities for growth. Actually, let me clarify that. But my challenge has been when I was very young, I was exposed to the idea and would adopt the idea that taking in other people's perspectives was always healthy and was always a great consideration and would help um, enormously. And when I communicate the ideas, it it seems to have a ring of truth to it. For example, right? Let's take a scientist or an intellectual. An intellectual is somebody who uses information and data and testing and evidence and uses that as the baseline to establish what is true, what is not true. Now, in actual practice, what happens is interesting because they come across vast amount of data, but not all the data they have is the right data. Not all the data they read or absorb changes their beliefs or changes their, which they would argue that it's not a belief if there's evidence. And here's where kind of the mental problem, the mental obstacle I'm having is. Let's take the word evidence. Evidence is this idea that there is external examples of that something is right or wrong. But one of the interesting things is a lot of times, in fact, many times, even in my day-to-day boring, mundane life, but particularly in researching spiritual traditions and or even going into science, is you realize that evidence does not always the be all end all of what's actually happening. For example, you can have evidence. It would help if I have a particular example. I can't think of one right now, but I'll get back to that. But here's the thing, right? There's a habitual right in there. I'm stuck. My brain, I'm on brain lock. This is what the problem is. I can't even examine a single word evidence and have the same meaning as it used to have. There's a lot of evidence to indicate that, for example, higher education in deeper intellectual ability leads to more understanding, increased understanding, and generally a whole host of benefits. But have you ever stopped to consider when you add in perspective? If somebody, say, has a high intellectual IQ, but they are surrounded by people who cannot and do not have that hardware and operate based on different motives, different comprehension levels, and there's only one of this, let's just call him the smart guy, and there's 99 dumb people. Well, here's a great question that arises as a result of that. One, do you think the smart guy ever feels understood? That they're ever able, even with a greater vocabulary or mathematical evidence or all this, it doesn't mean a thing if the other 99 people around them they're trying to communicate the idea to don't understand and can't understand. And two, here's a better question. If, say, a collective is made up of 99 people and this one person, who's and their intention is to give suggestions on what's the best course of action. Well, that one person, the 99 people are going to have different ideas. So what do you go with? Do you go with the majority that see things a certain way or one way, or even within that majority are going to have multiple ideas and opinions on what to do? Or are you going to go with the person who's best and most capable of interpreting the information correctly? Because in actual practice, what happens is that guy's going to come up with a much different idea of what needs to be done. Perspective, right? A lot of conversations in spirituality, but also in daily life, start with, okay, what does it look like for me? But when you start adding in perspectives, things get real tricky real quick. And because one, you can't ever really, there are a lot of obstacles to comprehension of somebody else's perspective. So perspective one is imagination. Your personal imagination is not an adequate tool to understand what other people's perspectives are. Two, even when you start to discuss and say, hey, the easiest way would be that is like, hey, what is your perspective? And you ask them. Well, whether they're going to be able to give it depends on a certain number of factors that are uncontrollables. One, does that person have the means to express what they're actually thinking and feeling? Because it turns out, I don't know if this is a me thing or a universal thing or just some people thing, but it's very clearly what I can comprehend in my head and what I can express verbally are two different things. In my head, I often can see aspects of a situation, and it's really not even a conscious thing. They're just they come together without necessarily consciously comprehension. But when I use my speech, all of a sudden I'm in this realm of I can only transmit what I'm conscious of. So there's a lot of things that are happening in that very moment within me when I'm trying to communicate with another person that I can't communicate. So this going back, this question of, okay, what's your perspective? They may not be able to give you a really comprehensive answer. Or there are even more factors. Third factor, are they editing the information based on what they think you want? A lot of people are oriented and geared towards social harmony and tend to use any number of biases, particularly, let's just take something really generic but generally understood, like people pleasing. They may not give you the answer because they have this habitual behavior, this conditioned response that has occurred over the course of years or decades where they're trying to make you happy. So they're not giving you the answer that is critically thought out. They're giving you the answer that, well, whatever I need to say to make this connection happen. And that's not necessarily the answer that's the truth. Another facet is we're all at the mercy of these internal set of conditions that even if we cut through them all, there's still so many unknowns as to what a person is. If I had to sum up 2025, it was the year I lost faith. I am a practicing Taoist, and I don't believe in Taoism. I am a practicing 12-stepper, and I don't practice, and I don't believe in 12 steps. I'm a practicing human, and I'm not even sure what human means anymore. Like, I really got swaddled with doubt in every area of my life, because overlooking at a thing and attempting to comprehend it through mental thoughts and overthinking have really just led me in circles. Uh, I loved Taoism in simplicity on paper, but then I, got some in-depth orientation, not the inner lineage stuff, but just even just the outer narratives. It's a religion. That's all it is. It's a narrative. It's a social narrative. Now, whether or not there is efficacy in techniques and methods, that's another story. But let's take something somebody's more familiar with and is a little more common. Um, if we walk into a 12-step community and there's no external factors going on and there's nobody that's not a part of the community, and there you're going to hear a lot of talk about spirituality. But spirituality itself is a loosely defined concept. It's very abstract, very general, and means different things to different people. And here's the thing. As a member of a 12-step community, I may consider other members spiritual. But if I'm defining spiritual by their lifestyle or their choices or whether they're selfless, all of a sudden as I introduce these more specific ideas, the room doesn't look the same because I've now compared it, measured it, judged it. And all of a sudden, I'm not seeing a bunch of people interested in spirituality. I'm seeing people who are maybe engaging in acts of selflessness as I define selflessness, or not. And stepping out of that, let's now take that 12-step community and let's see what it stacks up in relation to different communities. Their definition of healthy is more than likely not the same as, for example, the definition of healthy and spiritual in a Theravada Buddhist community. That's a completely different level of standard. So, well, they may both consider themselves spiritual or spirits or practicing, well, the Theravada, no, but it doesn't even matter. Nobody's watching this that knows the difference. Even though, now what, right? So in order for these people to integrate and communicate, they first have to decide to understand, am I going to let go of my personal definition of spirituality and accept these people where they're at? Or alternately, am I going to allow these individuals or am I going to say that these individuals do not meet my criteria and definition for spirituality? Because that's the truth too. And you're like, well, of course. I mean, the common, almost without thinking, knee-jerk answer, hopefully, actually, it's probably not that hopeful, is, of course, I will accept them the way they self-define. That seems like just proper etiquette, good. But here's the interesting thing. Particularly with spiritual practices that require heavy amounts of self-discipline, there's one thing that even if you've only dabbled with it, you're going to hopefully realize pretty quick. It is incredibly hard to keep a disciplined lifestyle when you are surrounded by people not practicing the same levels of discipline or not committed to the same emphasis of principles, right? Let's take something simple like smoking. In a 12-step community, smoking has nothing to do with spirituality or not smoking. It's a rather common thing. It's less common than it used to be, but secondary addictions almost without fail are present at most everybody's season of life. There are certainly exceptions. But you take that same act and you place that in a different context, say a Taoist or Buddhist context. Now all of a sudden, something interesting occurs. That same act is an act of desire. That same act is an act of obsession and craving. And when the basic criteria is the purpose and function of those practices, sometimes specific, sometimes general, um, are the idea that you're not engaging in obsession, craving, and desire. Well, here, um, there's another way to look at this, and we don't have to bring other spiritual practices in. Let's take different definitions of what sober is. Okay, so sober is a concept that you're not engaging, the starting definition, let's start with, you're not engaging in mood and mind altering substances. But the definition has changed in modern times. So now you have individuals that say one set of mood and mind altering, you are sober, and also you can use a set of mood and mind altering substances, like I don't drink, but I smoke weed, or I don't drink, I don't smoke weed, I don't use any of that. I try to avoid food and sex and other areas that I've had secondary issues with as well. But I smoke and I drink 3 coffees a day. Right. So now here we get into the meat and the bread and butter of a lot of the practices that it's misleading, but like have been associated with some of the Eastern ideas. Because here's an interesting thing, right? So, like in another example, like typically abstinence has been promoted for 90 years, but now people are starting to see results with things like microdosing and stuff. Does the quality? These are all external questions, and it's not. This is not to hate on them. Does everybody understand that? Like, this isn't me taking a side or even giving an opinion on the veracity and quality of those concepts. But I do also live in a world where, yes, these are real things, real concepts happening. And because they're part of my environment, because they are to a degree in front of me, I need to make a better understanding of how can I, assuming this is important to you, how do I make the most harmonious relationship with the greatest amount of people that I can. Um, because in my journey, I'm going to meet a bunch of people that do not meet conditions and criteria for what I think is right. And here's, I guess, what turns out this whole conversation is about. A lot of people in our community, collectives, and personally and individually, believe that treating people right, being moral, being ethical, are fundamental to who we need. We all want people to, if people could just be moral and ethical, and none of us agree on what that means. And none of us agree on what that entails. And none of us have, and instead of, and here's where the toxicity and the sick part comes in. Instead of focusing on what am I doing in my life to align myself with those beliefs I have, because I have a lot of I'm technically, no, and I am fairly decent practitioner. I mean, anybody who says they're not, I follow 28 precepts of the school lineage that I used to be involved in, that is no longer school. And I follow the 12 principles, as well as I loosely follow I'm going to butcher it, the and I loosely follow the 10 lay principles that are set down in something called the linear precepts. At one point I carried 7 lifetime precepts through a Theravada Buddhist school, though I've since purposely and intentionally allowed them to lapse. Too strict. Not for me. But the thing. Fuck. What am I trying to say?